what we see over here are three if statements nested one inside of each other. And we see the space indentation over here helps us get a clearer idea of what happens when. First of all, this is the whole big package. If this is true, then we're just going to do this and skip away to after this whole if thing over here. Only if it's not true, if we're going into the else part of it, then we have our second level of if statements over here. And again, if it's true, then we do this. And then we're just going to skip away to the end. If it's not true, again, so then we go to the third level of if statements. And as you can imagine, this can go on and on. A whole bunch of nested if and else statements, which all finish off with a semicolon. You can even have if statements which appear as the action if something evaluates as true. For example, let's say I want to test two things. First of all, I want to test if the player guessed my number, and then I also want to test if the player is alive. So how would we do this? One way is just to first test if the player got the right number, and then if that is true, we also want to know if the player is alive. So we will make an if statement as the contents as the action taken inside of the outer if statement. So we are going to test if alive, which since it's already a boolean, we don't have to use any relational operators. It already has the boolean value inside of itself, which is the same as typing if alive equals true. So here we have two if statements which together make a double condition. We want to know if this is true, and if that's true, we also want to know if this is also true. And finally, if everything is true, we will go ahead and do the actual stuff we want to do. If both of them are true. And of course, you can have a whole bunch of these conditions. If you want to have 5 different conditions being evaluated, you will line them up one after the other like this and test if all the conditions are true, and then finally take the action all the way at the end, which finally finishes with the semicolon. In truth, an if statement is really could be thought of as being just one command which can be put on one line, and only at the very end of a whole if statement do we have the actual closing semicolon. It's just that it's a little easier to read when you divide it up onto different lines, so that we see the different levels of nested if and if and if, as we saw earlier also with else. But here's where we could run into some trouble, because let's say I have my double condition over here. I want to test if this is true and if that's true, but then I want to have an else statement, which makes you wonder, where does this else refer to? Does it answer back to the second if, or does it answer back to the first if? Like, what's the message that I should type over here? Should I type alive isn't true, or which means that this else goes back to this if statement, or should I type player's guess is false? Where does this else go back on? This can cause somewhat some confusion later on if you're going to revise your code. It could be a little confusing to know where does this else go back. The truth is, it actually goes back to the most recent if that we had immediately before the else, but just so that things remain very clear and we don't risk any confusion, there is a better solution to arrange your if and else statements. This solution will also help us for another problem. What if we don't just want to print something out to the screen if it's true? What if we want to do a whole bunch of other stuff, like print 10 messages to the screen if it's true, all at one time? Let's cut this back to something very simple, just one layer of an if statement, and let's take out the else. Yeah, exactly. So now, if I want to print out 4 times, they're both true, or at this point it's appropriate to say they match, but I only want this to happen if this is true. Well, the problem is that the if statement begins right over here and ends right over here. So only this stuff is going to be depending on whether this is equal, if this is true or not. The rest of this, after that, is just regular back to normal code, which the program will always do, whether these things match or not. It is no more related to the if statement because the if statement finished right over here. So it seems a little dumb that with an if statement you can only do one and only action, and that's pretty dumb. So the solution is to use braces. As we saw before about functions which begin with a brace and finish with a brace, and they basically enclose a whole package of commands to do, this is what braces could help us over here too. Braces envelop a whole bunch of commands together and make it as if it's just one command. So what's happening here is like this. We are testing whether these two things match, and if they do, then we start running this little parentheses over here, whatever is inside the braces, between the opening and the closing braces, we just execute all of this stuff. And if this is not true, then we skip the whole entire brace enclosure and we continue doing whatever was over here, the rest of a program, whatever it may be. And you use the same thing when you want to have your else statement to make things a lot clearer. Else, we can have an opening brace, a closing brace, and then put inside of it whatever you'd like they don't match, and a whole bunch of other stuff you'd like to do if it's not true. And getting back to our complicated if statements, one if statement inside of another if statement inside of another if statement, and else statements and stuff like that, with the use of braces, this makes things a lot easier and a lot clearer to see exactly which if statement does what and what it doesn't do, if it's true or if it's not true, etc., etc. Here we have a complicated 3-layer if statement that we had before, but this time it's a lot more arranged and clearer to read and understand. First we're testing if they're equal. If they are, then we go into this package over here with the opening and closing braces, and we do whatever is inside of it. We could even do 10 different stuff at the same time. If they are not equal, then of course this is going to be skipped over, and we're going to start doing the else statement if there is one. And inside the else statement itself we have a double layer if statement which tests if it's bigger, then it prints lower, and again we could type it out 10 times because we have a nice package which begins here and ends right over here. And then we even have a third layer over here which tests if it's too low, and one final else statement over here which doesn't have the braces because it's only going to do one simple action, and then we end off by matching up our big parentheses, our big packages of commands. So make sure you understand well where does an if statement begin and where does it end, because anything that's right after the end of the if or else statement will be executed whether or not the evaluation is true. For example, if I try to print this twice over here, the second one is no more inside this else statement, and therefore it will always be printed whether this is true or not. So go ahead and play around with this. Make sure you understand well which else belongs to which if, where the if and the else statement begin and where do they end, and space everything out in a clear way so that we understand what belongs to where and what doesn't. Like for example here we know that now else is only going to do this, and this line over here is always going to be done whether the latest if statement is true or not. But of course all this only happens if we ever entered this brace section over here.